We finally have some encouraging leadership around here. Welcome to the podcast where we discuss how to outmaneuver your opponents. I'm Faith, and I'm joined by his Dudeness, Jrod, and a special guest, the head judge for the Dallas Planetary Qualifier, Chris Velastelika. Today, we are talking about the new upcoming planetary qualifiers. Jrod, can you start us off by quickly telling us what is a planetary qualifier?
So if you've been living under a rock, the planetary qualifiers are single-day events in the competitive play circuit of the Star Wars Unlimited game sphere that awards prizes, participation, and final placement. They are the first level of competitive play events and are held at select retailers around the world. Season 0, each winner will win automatically qualify for Day 2 of the Galactic Championship, and it was designed to be welcome to all players and skill levels with lower stakes and no tournament point system. So yeah, that's what PQs are in a nutshell.
This past weekend was the first round of them. So in the second set here was our first block of planetary qualifiers, and they're having them basically all throughout October, and they had 30 of them. The first 5 were this weekend, and his Dudeness was at one of them. He was in the Dallas one. So Dudeness, would you mind going through with us what you played, how your event went?
Sure thing. I ended up using Yellow Sabine. Shout out to Ryan Warner and Rebel Resource. It's mostly his list that I got a hold of. I brought it because I felt like it has a really good matchup into ECL Sabine and has a sort of reasonable matchup into Yellow Boba, both of which I was sure would be pretty prevalent on the day. And in the very first round, I go up against a green ECL Sabine player, exactly what I wanted to see. And this was a mirror match in 2 separate ways. It was a Sabine mirror match, also a mirror match between 2 Jasons. And this was a Jason, aka Impossible Germans from Garbage Rollers. Shout out to Garbage Rollers, love Garbage Rollers. But I was excited and actually really nervous in this very first match. Probably the most nervous I was out of the whole day was the very first match. I really wanted to get the win, did not want to lose. But game 1, I go Space, he goes Rebel Pathfinder. I'm already feeling pretty good. I keep a Bamboozle in my starting hand, which is like the key card against ECL Sabine. And then when it comes to the Sabine deploy turn, he deploys her out, puts a Darksaber on her, which is the thing that I wanted to see the most. And I'm able to play Bamboozle from my hand for free, discarding another yellow card to exhaust Sabine, bounce the Darksaber, and it was basically game over on the spot. In game number 2, he mulligans and does not see a round 1 play, and he said that is about a 2% chance happening in his deck. So he just got extremely unlucky. In an aggro mirror, you don't play a turn 1 play, you're going to lose. Unsurprisingly, I won. I started off 2-0. I was the first match finished on the day, or round took like maybe 10 minutes. The 2 games adjacent to me were still on game 1. We were finished with our 2-0 game, so that was pretty good. I felt really good. That eased my nerves a lot, getting that first win, and made me feel really confident going into round 2. Round 2 was a Bosk ECL deck. I hadn't had much practice against this, but I was ready for it. The first game, I'm able to play Akira and lock out Overwhelming Barrage, which more or less sealed that game. And in game 2, I'm able to bring in Pirated Starfighters to bounce any of my units that he puts a bounty on, which he does. I play turn 1 X-Wing, he bounties it, pings it. Round 2, I'm able to just bounce it with a Starfighter, play a Cartel Turncoat, and that was basically GG's from there. I won that 2-0. Also, pretty reasonably quick round. Going into round 3, this is my first Yellow Boba matchup. My game plan against Yellow Boba is definitely go wide, go space. Give him as many units to have to deal with as possible. You definitely do not want to play 1 big unit a turn and just have him bounced with Cunning or Waylay. That's a losing game plan against Yellow Boba. I win the first round, or first game, lose the second game. And then game 3, I'm able to play Alea tapping down his unit that he had just gave the +4 attack buff with Cunning. That was a huge tempo swing there, and that was the reason I won game 3. I won that 2-1. I'm 3-0 on the day, feeling really good about myself. And then going into round 4, I'm playing against a double green Palpatine, but he was on ECL. I'd never really seen that before. Most of the double green Palpatines I've seen are on 30 HP. He was on 25 HP, and I was like, brilliant. Kira was also huge in this matchup as well. The first game I'm able to lock out Barrage, and in the game 3 I'm able to lock out an Enterprising Lackeys that I'm pretty sure he was going to timely intervention to ambush something, more or less negated his entire turn, and that was enough to win that. I win that round 2-1, 4-0 on the day. Again, I'm feeling really great here. Going into round 5, this is the first time I'm actually on stream, going against another double yellow Boba list. Shout out to Bucketheads for streaming the entire event. They did a fantastic job. Love those dudes.
Yep,
but
they're amazing.
Fantastic. But I win the first game by going wide in space. It was just he couldn't stop it in time. I win that pretty easily. Going into game number 2 is when I actually had my first. This is the first time I had a judge called on me because I played a heroic sacrifice on an R2 unit and resolved that in the opposite order that it should have. I did the on attack with R2 first before drawing the card with heroic sacrifice. And then we had to rewind that. He had to, since I didn't know what card was in my hand, they had to let my opponent choose, look at my hand and choose one of the cards in my hand to put back into my deck and then draw the right card. And of course, he chooses the 4 cards I believe in, more or less locking me out of that game on the spot. So that felt pretty bad. And then in game 3, I'm just not able to get across the finish line. I lose that round 1-2, my first game loss or round loss on the day.
Well, let's ask Chris here. Chris, how does that sound to you as the head judge, the way that was that event interaction was handled?
Yeah, that was actually handled the way it was supposed to be. The floor judge that was handling the streaming room actually brought the case to me because, as Dudeness says, it was resolved in the incorrect order. And because he drew a card at a point when he should not have had that card, we had to allow the opponent to look at his hand. We had no way to verify what card was drawn. And so the opponent has the right to say, this is the card that was drawn, even if it actually was not that card, to get shuffled back into the random part of the library. So that was handled per policy exactly.
Thank you for the insight.
It seems reasonable. It felt bad at the time, but I mean, yeah, I don't really know how else you're able to resolve it. You can't just take my word for it and say, oh, this was the card I drew, right? So it is what it is.
And hold on, of note, just because he's on stream, judges are not allowed to use that
Correct.
to go determine that. So that's also not a possible factor here. You have to treat it as if they were off stream like anybody else. So just because you're on stream, you do not get special privileges, just to be clear on that.
100%, yep. So I'm still 4-1 on the day, still feeling pretty good about it. I'm going into round 6. I face a yellow Kylo list. I haven't played against this deck much, but I know it's super fast aggro. Game 1, my game plan is to control his board, which I do most of the game. I kill off the Kylo leader pretty easily. I'm just controlling his board, building up my board, and eventually I'm able to swing through for lethal. Game 2 was pretty close. I thought I had it in the bag. I buff up one of my units to go face when I could have traded into his Kylo leader, thinking that I can just claim and win the next round. He had 3 cards in hand. He needed to deal 12 damage, and he dealt the exact 12 damage by putting a Fallen Lightsaber on Kylo and using sneak attack to get in a lurking TIE Phantom and deal exactly 12, sending it into game 3 of the round. I'm like, damn it, I messed up. It's feeling pretty bad, but I was able to just out aggro him round 3, finish it off. I'm 5-1, feeling really good. Going into round 7, it's a win and you're in type of situation. Can't really ask for anything else. And in round 7, I face up against a blue Han 2. And this, I feel like, is a pretty bad matchup for my deck. And I end up losing it 0-2 pretty quickly. I'm not really sure if there's anything I could have done better to win that matchup. I don't know. It felt really bad. But I was 5-2 at the end of the day, waiting to see if I make the top cut. I'm outside waiting for the final round to finish, talking with the boys, BSing, waiting for the standings to post. So some guy says, hey, they posted the standings, and there I was at number 8. I was super stoked. That was probably my favorite moment on the day, actually, was finding out that I actually just barely squeaked it into top 8. That was my main goal on the day was just making the top 8. I did that. I was ecstatic. I think the reason I did make it top 8 as one of the only 2 5-2s is that both of my losses were against opponents that also made the top 8. So I think that worked out pretty good for me.
Well, let's turn to Chris here. Chris, can you explain for maybe viewers at home how tiebreakers work when you have players with similar records and they're trying to come into a certain numbered cut?
Yeah, tiebreaker is actually based on a variety of factors, and I believe there's actually a bonus hidden factor that Melee uses specifically for Star Wars Unlimited. But it all comes down to your strength of schedule. As Dudeness says, the reason he likely made it at 5-2 when other 5-2s didn't is because they may have played opponents that did worse in the event or played opponents that did worse in the event. So the fact that his only 2 losses were to players that went 6-1 really helped his tie breaks. I don't remember the actual order of them right now because thankfully we have electronics do that for us. But I know it's opponent's game win percentage, opponent's match win percentage, and then your own game win percentage. So if you win a match 2-0 as opposed to 2-1, that's better.
Okay.
And conversely, if your opponent wins a match 2-0, it's better for your tiebreakers if they would have a bunch of 2-0 victories because the opponent's game percentage was first?
Opponent's game win percentage is better, yes. I'll try to look for them here as Dudeness continues on, just to make sure I get them in the right order.
Sure. Yeah, like super stoked, super happy to make top 8. Easily my favorite part of the day because I was super hyped for it. I was like, yes, let's go. I made it. But I am the number 8 seed having to face off against the number 1 seed, which was Anil on the eventual winning Boba Green list. His list was different because he wasn't using ECL. He was using a 30 HP base, which I think is pretty spicy. But this match was on stream again by the Bucketheads. Game 1, I'm able to execute my game plan, go space, go wide, and I'm able to squeeze just enough damage. In the penultimate round of that first game, he no good to me deads my Falcon. I simply decline my option to pay the tax, a little foreshadowing there, and bounce the Falcon to my hand and then replay it the next turn. He was at 27 damage on his base. The Falcon swings for lethal. I go on to game 2. Game 2 was going not nearly as good. He was able to control my board a lot more, and I'm forced to at one point just put a heroic resolve on an already exhausted Falcon, trying to then activate that as my first action the very first round, or very first action in the next round, making sure I claim the initiative to have it. And in my, I don't know the right word here, excitement, that's not the right word, but in my, what is the right word? I don't know. I was not patient enough, and I was ready to just pay 2 resources and sack that heroic sacrifice and get my 7 damage in, that I had neglected to pay the 1 tax on my Falcon inadvertently. And as I go to pay the 2, sacrifice the attachment and activate the thing, that's when Anil points out, hold on a second, did you pay for the tax? And I was like, well, actually I didn't. And that's when this whole controversy happens, is that I have to end up pulling the Falcon back to my hand, dropping the upgrade off, and basically just losing the game on the spot. Now, I have gone back and looked at the footage again. I think there's a strong likelihood I was still going to lose that match regardless. But at the time, it definitely felt bad. And it's important to note, this was my first actual competitive event for any TCG ever in my life. Like officially sanctioned competitive event. I'm not used to dealing with judges. I had forgotten that you could even appeal the decision of a floor judge to the head judge. That was just not in my mind at all. I had wished that someone there in the room had simply just reminded me of that fact, that, hey, if you want to, you can appeal this call to the head judge, and I absolutely would have. But I didn't. I just took the ruling. I had to bounce the Falcon. I lose that game pretty easily going on to game 3. And game 3 was fairly close, but he was able to just squeeze it out and win 2-1. I lose in top 8, but I'm still pretty happy with my overall performance.
Well, congratulations, students, for how you played. if you're wondering why we have Chris on, it is because Chris is that head judge from the Dallas Planetary Qualifier. And so thank you, Dudeness, for sharing your perspective on the incident. Chris, I want to turn it over to you. Would you mind sharing for us, from your perspective, what you had heard, what happened, and what the proper protocol would have been, or should have been, or could have been?
Sure. Let me address the tiebreakers real quick, if that's okay, just to get that done. So it's your match wins. So did you win the match or not is the first tiebreaker. That's just your points. The opponent's match win percentage. So how many matches did they win out of the total number of matches they played? Then their game win percentage. How many games did they win versus lose? And then your opponents that you have played in your previous matches, their game win percentage. So those are the four tiebreakers if you include your total amount of match wins as a tiebreaker in order of relevance.
And in that, just to clarify, is that just win-loss, or is there win-loss tie in that?
So the tie, meaning that you won one, lost one, and then time ran out before you finished the third game. Is that what you're considering a tie?
Yes.
Yeah, so apparently Melee has a bonus tiebreaker where that draw, which is a double loss, applies as a bonus tiebreaker that's not reported anywhere. So it's possible to see the same match wins, the same match win percent, the same game win percent, and a same opponent's game win percent, with one person being ranked higher because someone drew as opposed to having an actual factual loss. But that's all coming from people that understand Melee much better than I do.
Thank you for that insight.
But back to Dudeness's situation, I was not the judge at the streaming table, as I said before. Generally, the head judge is not going to be watching a match like that, if possible, to allow the players the right to appeal. Because if I take a call and I make a ruling, neither of the players has a right to appeal, since they'd be appealing to myself. So in general, when you have top 8, I will not be specifically sitting at any table, but available for appeals or for consultation as it arises. In this case, which is a different case from normal during the PQ, almost every call was brought to me first to make sure that the call that was on the field was correct before it was officially issued. In the case of this table and this specific incident, it wasn't, which is surprising, and it's not a big deal. I mean, judges are supposed to be able to issue their ruling and move on. Now, the only way that this went the way it did is because of 4 things. These 4 things had to happen to have the result be as it was, which was, number 1, the player had to make an error, which did happen. The opponent had to not catch it and not call the judge, which did happen. The judge had to make a ruling that was less than correct. It was a fair ruling, but I don't think it was the best solution in this case. And then the player had to not appeal. In this case, all 4 of those things happened. So the ruling stayed as was stated by the judge. To go back just a bit, when I did the player announcements, I did say that, I introduced myself. I gave a whole bunch of information, then said, when it comes to judge calls, if you don't understand what's going on in your game, if you have a question about a card, if your opponent does something wrong, or if you get a ruling you don't agree with, you can appeal to me, and my ruling is final, which is a very common player meeting thing to say to players. Again, I judged Magic for over 12 years, and it's just one of the general player meeting announcements that we make. Typically, players don't listen to those announcements. It's the way it is.
Yep.
I think as judges, we understand that, but it's more of a keep ourselves safe in the event that something comes up. Every time we issue a ruling, we are not going to say you have the right to appeal. That's generally just an understood thing. In this case, Dudeness didn't understand it. Again, it was his first competitive event. I strongly believe that you gained a lot of knowledge during this event because of not only this specific circumstance, but others that went on around you from your friends that you talked to and things like that. In the specific case of this ruling, in Magic back to 2019, and I know that's not Star Wars, but there was a ruling for missed triggers, which this was a missed trigger. You have to pay 1 or return Falcon to your hand when you ready resources in the resource phase. In Magic, if there was an action and you didn't do it, we would default to the other action or the default action. That's not quite the same in this case of the Falcon because it's pay 1 or return it to your hand, not pay 1. If you don't, return it to your hand. But I can understand if the judge was coming from that standpoint of Magic, the ruling makes perfect sense, and there's history there to back that up. In this case, though, It was a very simple backup because this was the first action that Dudeness had taken in his action phase after forgetting to pay the 1. All you have to simply do is say, okay, hold on. The action you're taking, we need to rewind back to this trigger and resolve it. So undo your action of, I think it was Heroic Resolve that you were resolving, right? Yeah. And then go back to the very end of the resource phase. And okay, now the trigger's there. Are you going to pay 1 and return it to your hand? So the game state would have been the exact same if we would have rewound as opposed to where we ended up. He just would have had 1 more exhausted resource, which would have been just as fine. So that didn't happen. I wasn't notified about it until after it had already happened and the gameplay had resumed, at which point, if we would have stopped it then and backed up, it would have caused more harm to the game state than just letting them play on. So there was really nothing we could do to stop that and fix it at that point. So unfortunately, the ruling just stood and we couldn't do anything about it.
So I just want to quickly just ask something that you said there. You mentioned that in your 4 things that your 4 things that didn't happen, one of them you'd mentioned, I think was the player didn't catch their own, like they made a mistake. I think number 2 was they didn't announce
the opponent missed the figure.
Exactly. So normally, I believe this happened twice previously, Dudeness. At least that's what was reported to me, is that you had missed this same trigger in game 1, but your opponent noticed it and said, hey, you need to pay 1 to return it. And I believe you paid 1. And then it happened again, either in game 1 or game 2, where he noticed it. Neil noticed it and said, hey, you need to pay 1 or return it to your hand. And that this was actually the 3rd instance of it happening. And in this case, he didn't catch it. Is that a true statement? That's what was relayed to me.
When I went back and watched the stream, I only saw 1 instance of me not paying it, but it's possible it was the second time. I don't know.
I'm getting secondhand knowledge. I didn't go back and watch the stream. Yeah. I got to live the day, so I don't really want to relive it again. But yeah, so those 4 things had to happen for this specific ruling to be given and to be applied. But I mean, now you know that the right to appeal is always there unless the head judge gives the ruling. You can always say, "Are you sure about that?" or things like that. Like I'm pretty sure this is what happened before. But arguing too much with a judge is a good way to get an unsporting conduct penalty. So just be careful with that. But a simple appeal, you're not going to get in trouble for that. And I mean, I've been appealed in my past as a Magic judge. I told the judges before we started the day that, you may get appealed and that's okay. This is a season 0 event, which is an odd name for it. But, Fantasy Flight games and Cascade games are both dipping their feet into the competitive environment. I don't think Fantasy Flight expected this game to be as popular as it was, as fast as it was. So there was a lot of learning that needed to go on, especially for both players, because there's a lot of players that didn't expect or understand the interaction with judges that they could have. And then, for judges as well that have to learn, this whole brand new policy. Plus, taking a rules test is easy. Having 2 players stare at you while you're giving a ruling is a lot different.
I have a quick question. So, as you just stated lovely there, how new and how many players, this is their first competitive TCG event, and they haven't had interactions with judges before at events, other than maybe their buddy who judges their local and he just knows the rules, right? This is more formal. And you had said earlier that, we're not going to say you can appeal every single ruling, but would you consider that for this game specifically? Because Magic, it's well known, but this game, with having so many new TCG players, would you consider saying, hey, if you think that someone is even remotely unsure about your call, say, this is my call, but feel free to, appeal it if you would like. I'm not saying for every call, right? But you can kind of tell sometimes where this call might be a little weird and might be a little, they're feeling uneasy about it. Because you can kind of tell, I'm sure Dudeness had some emotions on his face that he was unhappy with the call and might have wanted to appeal it. So maybe the judge could have been like, hey, Justin, you can appeal this if you'd like. In this instance, I'm not saying everyone, because obviously there's some that the judges are very confident in their ruling and they don't feel the need to say, hey, you can appeal this. You know what I mean?
No, I understand exactly what you mean. One of the things you should do when you're judging and giving a ruling is be confident about it. As I told my judge staff beforehand, if you're not sure, judging is open note and open judge. If you want to get a double check on something before you deliver your ruling, do it. The problem could be that we end up in this situation where the ruling that was given probably could have been done a better way to keep the game state the way it should have been. But if you tell every player, hey, here's my ruling, but you can appeal it every single time, you're going to get a lot of appeals that just don't need to
Right.
happen. On the reverse
for
side,
sure.
though, you may get an appeal or two that actually does fix the game state the way it should be, and those players will have a better experience. So it goes both ways. I mean, obviously, in hindsight, had we said it every single time this time, this incident wouldn't have happened. But would you say it every single time? I'm not sure. It's a good point, but that comes down to policy. I don't write policy.
No, for sure. And I mean, but as the head judge, you could have said, hey, guys, and just to be very clear, everyone, I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just trying to have a discussion about this so we can maybe find a better way to help new players feel more comfortable at these events. Because as a seasoned player, I have no problem at these events. But new players, especially like Dudeness, where if he didn't have everyone saying like, hey, oh yeah, this is what you can do in the future. If he wasn't someone in the community and you're just a random person going to this event and this happened to you, you'd probably have a bad taste in your mouth and not want to show up to the next one, right? Yep. So I'm looking to help avoid this in the future by, having this open discussion here with friend here. So just be very clear on that. I'm not trying to, be mean or anything like that.
Feel attacked or anything like that at all.
I just wanted to be clear.
I'm curious more for go back 25 years to Magic when it first started and none of these policies existed for any type of game whatsoever. The players then, they couldn't be in that situation. They had to be completely educated, brand new on how judging in general was going to happen to this new fad of a TCG tournament. In this case, I think it's expected, maybe with an asterisk, that most people that play competitively for Star Wars are going to be coming from a game of another sort that also has competitive play. It's obviously not always true. And our announcements are going to be general in nature. We can't go over every single piece of minutia about, and policy says this, policy says that, because that'll drone on and even less people will start paying attention. But it is a good point that for this game in its new state, they may want to initiate or at least educate head judges more on, hey, this is what your announcements should entail. I fell back on my old Magic judging announcement template that I use. We were also given guidance from Jonah Kelman, who's the judge manager at Cascade Games, with, hey, you should include these type of things in your announcements, which might include it. But, for brand new people, it would be good to have something for them that will allow them to understand you're drinking from a fire hose here. And things are going to get overlooked. You're going to misremember some things, especially as the day drones on. I'm sure that Dudeness's brain was on fumes at that point. After, what was that, about 9.5 hours, maybe 10 hours of gameplay. Mm-hmm. We had a 2-hour delay in there because round 5 got deleted on accident. We started 45 minutes late. But, other than those minor issues, the day went relatively well up until the feedback from this top 8 call that I wasn't even notified. I wasn't in the room. I wasn't in the streaming booth. The floor judge just came and told me what happened. We were talking about it. And then we heard some ruffling from, I believe it was some of the garbage rollers that were watching the stream that were relatively unhappy with the outcome of the call.
Well, we want to say again, thank you for coming and for discussing. This was, so viewers at home know, this wasn't meant to be an inquisition or a witch hunt. It was meant ultimately, and hopefully for everyone listening, to help you when you go to either a planetary qualifier for set 2 or for set 3, or if you're listening to this and we're on season 25, whenever you're listening to this, hopefully this is a little bit of help for you if this is your first major competitive event you're going to. Absolutely. Are there any other questions for Chris before we kind of move off of this particular incident and we can talk more about judging in general?
Well, so Chris, what would you recommend to a new player trying to learn? Because right now there really isn't any kind of content for anyone. Like, where would you recommend or guide them to go to try to maybe ask questions or find out information on how to interact with judges or better that? Where would you send them?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's actually 2 Discords that are used for rules questions. There's the official Cascade Judges Discord, and then there's the Star Wars Unlimited official Discord, both of which have rules questions forums in the Discord that you can type up your question and get a relatively quick answer. Especially in the Star Wars Unlimited Discord, we definitely seem to try and compete with each other to get the answer out first. Many times I'll be typing up an answer and I'll see 2 other people that I know the rules very well, and I'll just start backspacing my answer out and be like, all right, they're going to get it because I'm wordy.
Great. And we'll link those in the bottom here in case you guys happen to not be in that.
For sure.
A question for you about this event a little bit, actually, though, is how did you become the head judge for this event? You said that so far, because the game's still new, all the judges took a small written test and there wasn't any further qualifications. So how did you get chosen as the head as opposed to other judges?
Yeah, that's a good question too. Back in, I want to say July, I can't remember the exact date, when the Cascade Judges Discord opened, they had a test for us to take for the Season 0 planetary qualifiers. And what it was a series of, I think it was 20 questions, all dealing with card interactions. So testing us whether or not we knew the basic rules. And additionally, a couple questions about policy that comes from the master event document that Fantasy Flight Game writes and maintains, that contains all the penalties and remedies for those penalties in it. So we all had to take this test if we wanted to judge one of these planetary qualifiers in October. And based on the results of those tests, apparently Cascade Games sent stores that had won the right to hold a October planetary qualifier the names of judges that clicked the checkbox for floor judge or clicked the text box for floor judge / head judge. So I clicked floor judge / head judge because of my Magic experience. I'd head judged many events in my day. I can't remember how many events I've head judged, and I've definitely run events that had, people below me as floor judges that I would help mentor or guide or direct depending on the situation. So from what I understand from talking to the store themselves, they got to make the final decision on who they were deciding to use for their events. And I was notified that they wanted me to judge. They just weren't sure which position. And I guess there was 2 others that also applied for the head judge position. And from what I understand, the experience I had with Magic is what put me in the head judge spot.
Awesome. Thank you.
So what's the next stage going forward with the judge program? I if I remember correctly, they do have more things they're going to do to have a better, or not better, but just a more advanced system of testing for judges going on in the future. So do you know anything about that?
Yeah, actually, they have it on their Cascade Games website. I believe right now the roadmap only goes through the end of October, which doesn't help an awful lot since we're halfway through the month or almost halfway through the month there already. But what they're working on now is a series of video lessons and written lessons that you can look at that cover pretty much the entirety of the comprehensive rules, some of the tournament regulations, and I don't believe any of the policy is there. And what they're trying to do is get the generics of all the rules out for people to look at and review. And then they'll be working on crafting the level 1 test that will start certifying people at level 1. They also had a smaller test after the Season 0 test that was the Judge Apprentice test, which was a slightly more complex test than the Season 0 test that only covered the rules. And if you pass that, you were a Judge Apprentice. I'm not sure, honestly, what that gets you other than a green name in the Discord. But I think it's like if you can think about the old Magic judging system, there's the rules advisor role, which is it was a title you could hold that showed that, yeah, the basics of the rules and from there, generally you could progress to level 1. So I know they're going to be working on level 1 test and certification at some point after October, but they are planning for a total of 5 levels of judge, which is what Magic used to have, and they've now since condensed that down to 3. But for scope for you guys and for anyone that's listening, a level 3 judge is what's required to head judge a planetary qualifier. And then level 2 is required to be a floor judge at a planetary qualifier. So you're starting to get up there when you get to planetary qualifiers, but we don't know the scope of the testing that's involved for those yet since they haven't been developed.
Is there any advice that you have for players that you, as a kind of a platform here, that you'd want them to know as they head into their events?
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely a good idea to take a look at the comprehensive rules on your own and also look at the master event documents, which holds the policy regarding play errors and penalties and things like that. Knowing what to expect going into an event, or if you get called on because you've made it a penalty, knowing what that outcome probably should be, or having a general idea of, oh yeah, I remember that's what, that document said would happen to me, would be very helpful. Because the last thing you want is to hear, I got a 2-point penalty. What does that mean? If you realize what's in there, if you accumulate 10 points worth of penalties during an event, you're immediately disqualified. That's a Fantasy Flight Games thing in their policy, and it's just the way it is. It didn't happen. Nobody got more than 3 penalty points at the planetary qualifier. So getting 10, you have to work for that. That's a difficult one to reach. But knowing what to expect on your interaction.
Challenge accepted.
Yeah, good luck. That's not the challenge you want to meet. But just knowing what you can expect coming from a judge, when they deliver their ruling on what they're specifically saying would help a lot. Understanding that judges are there to help. I mean, it doesn't feel like it when they say, sorry, you got a game loss because of whatever error happened to happen. It doesn't feel good, and it doesn't feel like they're helping you. But you have to remember, you earned any penalty that you got. We're not giving you something. You did something to earn yourself that penalty. And you just have to get that through your head that, yeah, I made a mistake, and, just own up to your own actions. That's not to say some judges are going to be removed from judging because of either their attitude or their demeanor or things like that. But you just have to realize we're there to help. If we're watching your game, it's not because we think you're doing something wrong. It may just be an interesting game. It could also be because you've been sitting there for a minute and didn't do anything, and we want to get the game moving because no one wants to sit and watch your opponent think.
And as a player, I'm going to add on to that. Just realize that judges are your friends. Think about being a judge. Like, as all of us who enjoy playing the game, love to play the game, these people have decided that they love this game so much that I want to make sure everyone plays it fairly at competitive events. So they're spending their free time learning the game in depth more than most people, spending their free time going to events that they're not going to play in, that they're not going to get any reward or benefit other than just being a judge there. Like, it's a very thankless job, and so understand the people that are willing to do this generally give a whole lot of, you get judge promos, I know that, but I mean, they give a lot of their time and effort just to be, there for everybody else. So do they get a little bit of bonus? Yeah, they do. But realistically, at the end of the day, they don't get a whole ton. So just remember that they're there to help you. They are your friends. And if you treat them as such, you'll have mostly good experiences. I'm sure there'll be some corner cases where people get too big for their britches, but that happens everywhere. So,
Chris, would you mind also just letting us know what was kind of the most common mistake that you found or that needed a judge interaction?
Oddly, it was Inferno 4, which is the 2/3 space unit that costs 2, that when it enters play or is defeated, you look at the top 2 cards of your deck and you can put any number of them on the bottom. I believe it's any number. It might just be 1. I can't remember off the top of my head.
Any number, yeah.
Okay. So we had one where a player used that ability when they attacked. We had one where a player, it's only, like I said, when played or when it was defeated. We had another one where a player just did not do the ability, and his opponent had one sitting on the board on the opposite side. So the opponent, obviously knew what the card did. They did it right. And then, their opponent played it and nobody did the trigger. So I think Inferno 4 was responsible for 3 of 12 judge calls that day, which was surprising because that one's a fairly simple card.
That one was not on my bingo card.
Yeah, right.
I'm not sure.
My initial infraction could have the R2 heroic sacrifice. If I'd have just read the card, it would have explained the card, and I would have avoided the entire debacle. But here we are.
So reading the card explains
the card.
Yes, sir.
Chris, have you had a chance to look at any of the set 3 spoilers? And if so, is there anything that you're, from a rules perspective, a judge perspective, that set 3 is bringing forth, which can have a challenge?
Yeah, I mean, exploit by itself looks to be a pretty interesting mechanic. It's unfortunate that it's named after a Magic mechanic that isn't quite the same. But yeah, being able to get cheaper units in play is always a terrifying prospect, as we've seen from the Magic experience. But it looks like it's very interesting. Anything that you exploit, if it has a when defeated trigger, I guess to go back a little bit, exploit says it's exploit and then numerical value. And you can exploit X number of creatures, which is defeat them, to make this unit cost 2 less for each unit that you defeat during the casting of, or not casting, in the event of playing this unit. So the when defeated on any units that you defeat will actually resolve after the unit is already in play. So it will trigger while you're defeating them to pay the cost, but the when defeated will happen afterwards. And I think that's going to trip some people up, at least initially. There's always growing pains with any new set and any new mechanics, but exploit seems to be scary, powerful. Hopefully the units it comes with aren't extremely good, but that looks to be a pretty fun mechanic. I'm not sure about coordinate. having to keep 3 units in play. Usually if your opponent has 3 units in play already and you're not answering them, you're probably in trouble. But yeah, I think those are the 2 major mechanics in this set, correct?
Yeah.
Yep.
Question on the exploit and when defeated. If the exploit creature you're playing, if that has a when played ability, can you choose the order of the when played and when defeated, or what?
Yeah, they're gonna try to resolve in the same window, which is not anything that's listed in the comp rules, the term window. But yes, the when defeated from the exploited unit and the when played from the unit that you just played will both be trying to resolve at the same time. So, and in the case of Crate Dragon, if your opponent had a Crate Dragon, their when played will also be trying to resolve. So you would choose which player is going to resolve those first, and then that player can choose whatever's waiting and resolve those in the order that they choose. So yes, you can do your when played first and then your when defeated.
Okay.
And you can throw ambush in there too and put like the ambush ahead of it all.
Yeah, ambush is actually that's just a shortcut word, a keyword. It actually says it's an actually is a when played ability. So when played, you may ready this unit and attack a unit.
Interesting. I think for what I've heard people say, which to me helps me remember the exploit cost, is thinking of it with Maudie. And like if you use a villainy card with exploit, you could, if you use the exploit, you exploit the Maudie, you can have the unit you play ready, enter readied. Not enter readied, but it would ready after it entered. Is that correct?
As long as it's a villainy unit, yes. Modi is specific to you can ready a villainy unit.
Correct, yeah. Sounds like a pretty good line, though. Honestly.
Yeah.
Like, might actually see Madi played for the first time ever.
Yeah, pretty bad otherwise, but you're right. Very good with exploit.
As Jrod was mentioning, Chris, a lot of the times judges really like the game and they sacrifice the ability to play the game. How have you been playing SWU? Is there Star Wars Unlimited? Is there a certain deck that you like, a certain style you like?
Well, I got into it randomly just at a card shop, saw it, picked up the 2-player starter deck to play with my son. He's 9 years old, and we play together. He goes to, some casual Friday night events with me where they play best of one. We haven't really had to deal with sideboarding, which, is takes time and a lot more brain power. But yeah, we play every other Friday, give or take. We're not allowed to judge and play at the same time, which makes sense at a competitive event. But at a casual event, just on a Friday, if you want to be the official judge for that event, you also can't play in it, which hopefully will get changed because that's different from Magic, who's allowed that for decades. So, but yeah, I definitely play. I think if you only judge and don't play, you're going to miss interactions and understandings that you wouldn't have had otherwise. So, but some judges can do that. I want to play the game. Getting compensated, getting judge promos, things like that, and not being able to play with them, it's nice to throw the bling around. So.
For sure. And it helps that this game is actually just fantastic.
Absolutely.
It's some of the most fun I've ever had with the CCG.
Would agree. Hey, Chris, what is your deck of choice?
Right now, it's Han2 Green with Maz Kanata. I can't remember how to say her last name.
Yep.
But being able to get her out as a 3/3 on turn 1, and then usually a 4/4 right after, that can be almost game-winning on the spot. Not sure it would survive well enough against a Bobo with armor and overwhelming barrage and the magical rainbow land, but it's fun. I think Han2 Blue is definitely something I've been having my eye on. Getting cheaper cards is always, as Jrod, from Magic, it can be one of the major downfalls of a game. Once you make things cheaper, the resource cost is what keeps things more or less balanced. And once you start removing that, it can cause problems. So I definitely like cheating out units for cheaper than they should be.
Yeah.
This guy's favorite deck is a Go Wide Han. Like, what a legend.
My favorite deck right now is Han2 Blue, so you're in the right chat right now.
Yeah, playing 3 1-drops on turn 1 sparks an immense amount of joy for me personally.
Yeah, I mean, just playing a 6/5 with Restore 3 that does -6/-6 for 5 seems like real good to me. Or 6. Yeah, 6. Seems like insane to me, so I'm all there for that for sure.
Well, thank you so much, Chris, for joining us here today, for taking the time to both explain the interaction that Dudeness had, also to talk about the judge program in general, and to let us know a little bit about yourself. We want to, as we end today, we want to give you the floor to share any last comments that you may have.
Any shout outs you may have.
Oh, definitely to the floor judge staff. They definitely took quite a beating just by having to stand for 12 hours and trying to assist me. A lot of them, it was their first event, their first time judging, which was difficult. And, I expected it going into it. It was wonderful to work with them. The one thing I want to make sure of is that Dudeness did not have a immensely sour experience. I understand at the time it was bad for you. It left a bad taste in your mouth. But given, it's almost been a week now, how is your impression? You're still going to keep playing, I assume.
100%.
You're not going to try and get me in my sleep or anything like that. But I just want to make sure that you're doing good and that you're going to keep on playing.
Oh yeah, I fully intend to keep playing. Now I am a salty person in the moment, but as the phrase goes, time heals all wounds. And for me, that time doesn't need to take very long. Like 2 days later, I'm basically over it.
And you've learned a lot, right? I mean, you know
100%.
so much more.
I'm never missing another Falcon tax for the rest of my life.
He's just never playing Falcon ever again.
That's not true. He's gonna miss it.
And I'm for sure understand the judge and the head judge interactions a lot more, because like I said, this was my first actually competitive event where I had to interact with judges in any way, shape, or form. But I mean, in the moment, I'm extremely salty, but like 3 days later, I'm totally over it. If anything, it's a great learning experience, as you said. Like I'm not gonna have, hopefully, these problems in the future at my next PQ or whatever.
And if it makes you feel better, I know one of the tournament organizers was trying to make a YouTube video for players such as yourself, someone that's new to the competitive gaming world, about what you can expect when you go to your first competitive event or your first event with a judge, just so you understand. We got pushback for watching games from a pretty nasty Reddit post from a player that said, I don't want judges watching my game. They should be sitting there waiting, for us to call them. Not how judging works. We can't catch cheaters if we're sitting to, wait for things like that. We need to be proactive watching games because we like the game. We want to watch people play that are probably better than us. I'm an awful competitive player. So I like watching people that are better than me play the game, making the lines that I wouldn't have seen. So it's important. And hopefully that tournament organizer will get that out there so that some of these players, such as yourself or your friends or what have you, can actually take a look at it and not be so thrown off by just the presence of someone watching them.
Yeah, that seems odd to me to be mad at someone watching your game. Like,
in my experience, you're either brand new or you're a cheater if you don't want a judge to watch it. And
right. You laugh, but it's
something that
true.
was new. But they were pretty upset that I was watching their game, and it seemed to tilt them. But again, it was their first time at a competitive experience as well, so they didn't know what to expect. And I think they've been educated since then. But as far as I understand, that Reddit post is pretty lengthy with some scathing reviews for the Dallas PQ. So I haven't read it because I don't want to get involved in that. But yeah, there's a lot of people clearly that just need a little bit of education. I think it goes a long way.
Well, I hope this episode, people watch it and listen at large and maybe learn a little bit more about how judging works, and so we can try to avoid some of these issues in the future as a community at whole.
Well, thank you everyone for tuning in and listening. We'll see you next time on Outmaneuver.
Cheers, y'all.
Later.